Okay, good morning, Lindsay, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ward. It's great to be here.
One of the things that I love about our industry is the diversity of backgrounds that people come from before finding their way into data centers. And, yours spanned corporate law, real estate, renewable energy, before you made that transition. So I was hoping you might just be able to walk us through that journey, add a bit of color to it, take us right through to your role today as COO of CleanArc.
Yeah, no, happy to. So I describe myself as a recovering attorney. And I did, as you noted, I did practice law for the better part of 2 decades. My legal career started in real estate. And so that's kind of been a common thread through all of my stops, is that all of my jobs have involved some touch on real estate. So real estate and real estate focused M&A and private practice. Then I went in-house to still one of the largest independent power producers in the world, the Americas branch of the RES Group. And there I really got my first exposure to working internationally, and working on large scale projects that had very complex development pieces that involved different land rights, land use. You just had to put a lot of things together to get a successful renewable energy project. And so that was really interesting. I learned quite a bit. And the difference between working in the US, even state to state, and then going and having to really understand the differences between US development and development in Quebec or development in Chile. It was such a great learning experience and has been obviously very valuable in what I continue to do in the data center space. So I was at RES for almost 10 years and had been talking with a recruiter about looking for some new opportunities outside of Colorado, where I was living at the time. And one day she called me up and said, "Hey, have you ever heard of data centers?" I said, "No." "What is a data center?" And so she, kind of gave me a broad overview, and it was one of the first things that struck me was, oh, this is really just it's the other side of the substation from what I've been doing for the past 10 years. This is offtake instead of generation. And so, had some interviews with CyrusOne, joined their legal team, supported their site selection and construction teams for a couple of years. And then through some, really great mentorship and sponsorship, I had the opportunity to take a promotion onto the business side, which coincided. It was just a few months before we had CyrusOne acquired what was then Ingenium. And that became our, CyrusOne EMEA's operation. So I had the opportunity to go work internationally again, and learning new things, applying a lot of lessons about how do you go into a new market, and whether you're going state to state or country to country, there's a lot of crossover there. CyrusOne for several years, and had the opportunity to be introduced to James Trout, who's the CEO of CleanArc. And he was at the time just in the starting phases of building what would eventually become CleanArc. And so he and I and Bill Thomas, who's our chief energy officer, he also comes from the renewables background. We have a lot of circles in common there. We kind of helped Jim build the idea of CleanArc out into a company. And after I left CyrusOne following the take private by KKR and GIP, I was able to join CleanArc as the chief operating officer, and it's been a really interesting ride going from 400 people at the time publicly traded company to 7 people in a startup, and literally building everything from the ground up. It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, I was actually reading somewhere that you've described building CleanArc as putting together a 1,500 piece puzzle without a picture on the box.
It is very much like that. You have some idea of what it's going to look like. You find the corner pieces, but filling in the detail. It's a lot of work, but it's very fun work, and we've put together an amazing team, a really great first project, and lots of exciting stuff in the pipeline.
Yeah, I saw a couple of the projects that are in the public domain. The campus in Virginia, there's one in Dallas. What does it feel like when a piece of that puzzle finally unlocks and or locks in.
It's a great sense of accomplishment. You start to see that picture taking shape. And every time you get a section of a puzzle completed, then the next pieces seem to find themselves a lot more easily. So it's momentum that builds on itself.
What would you say is the most challenging aspect of building from a blank slate?
Honestly, I think org design has been the most interesting thing that we've come across. I mean, we've evolved the structure a couple of different times, and there's the planning that you do when you're like, okay, sky's the limit. What do we want this to look like at the end of the day? And then there's the, okay, we've got this really instant need, and so we need to hire this particular person either because they're available right now and at no other time, or we've got this development that we're working on with Crow Holdings here in Dallas. Like, that's a little bit of a different approach for us. And so we've got to hire some roles that are really very specific toward that scope of work. And so sort of reconciling those two things then of, okay, what does the organization look like today? And how do we continue to evolve and build that organization to be where we want it to be in 2 years and 5 years, when we've got, 2 or 3 gigawatts under construction or operations. That is a real challenge. You really start to take for granted how simple it felt in a bigger organization to just be like, oh, well, I need, delivery manager 2 and 3 over here for this site. And I, need something at this level over here. And it really takes a lot of thought and a lot of deliberation and intention to build a good organization.
It was very clear to me when we met at PTC in January that that's something that you're really passionate about, people development, org design, solving workforce challenges. I have heard you refer to workforce challenges as a sustainability issue in the past, and I suppose that's an interesting word choice because usually when people use that word in our industry, they're talking about environmental sustainability. Yeah. So can you maybe help us understand what you mean when you use that term for Albert?
This is something I could probably talk about for the next 2 or 3 hours. I think we spent a lot of our lunch at PTC talking about this. But so when I think of workforce development as a sustainability issue, it really kind of covers a couple of things. One is that when you look at the skill sets needed to actually build a data center, just any old data center, not even talking, the giga scale facilities, you need the trades. You need plumbing and electrical and mechanical. You need people that back up the manufacturing that goes into data center components, whether it's, the steel or the fittings or the, wires, cables, like all of that. You need a lot of those people. And that is an area of the workforce that has been on the decline in the US, and I think probably globally as well. So you've got this convergence already of people in, construction trades and building trades retiring or just not going into the workforce. And at the same time, there's this huge demand for those skills to come in. So the people that are still in it are working, twice as hard. There's not as many people to fill. It reduces the number of buildings that can be completed. It makes working more dangerous. When you're talking about, some like electrical work at any voltage is already dangerous. And when you've got to say, okay, well, I need 6 people to do this job safely, and I can only find 4, that's a real measurable impact. From a sustainability standpoint, it's human capital. It's that we need to make investments in people in developing these pipelines of skills that we haven't been doing. And then when you just apply the scale to it, the level of knowledge that has gone out of the industry, even for things like we're returning to cooling technologies that were used decades ago. And, that knowledge has kind of been lost. And so it's got to be rebuilt from scratch. Creating that workforce that really understands the product being delivered at all levels, that knows how to operate the product being demanded, and that can deliver something at scale. If you don't invest in that, it's not sustainable for anyone. It really goes to, if you're talking about metrics, if you're filling out, an ESG questionnaire, which, we've had to do for a couple of the investors through, our investor, it really goes to that social aspect. Like, how are you engaging with your people? And for CleanArc in particular, it drives one of our corporate values, which is stewardship. Obviously, stewardship of the environment. We're clean is part of our name. We're very, very invested in making sure that energy and development and construction are clean based, but also it's stewardship of people, stewardship of our employees. Are we presenting them with a working environment, working conditions, and working, career future that is meaningful to them and is sustainable to us as a business and them as people?
Clearly, you built your career by moving across disciplines. Does that experience make you a bit more attuned to what the industry is actively losing when it insists on rigid industry experience requirements when hiring?
Oh, absolutely. And this is something that, that we've spent a lot of time talking about as we think about what our hiring plans are. It's like, okay, where do we focus on? Yeah, it'd be great if every role we could hire had, at least a couple of years of experience doing that. But, that's not a realistic, achievement. And so, we kind of look at, okay, where do we really need that experience? Like, maybe we need it at the VP level, someone that can then further develop, like we can pull people from renewables that have a ton of, cross-functional skills. They're very analogous. And, can we pull people from non tech industries that have great project management skills, that have great finance skills, IT, HR? Absolutely. Like, those are really applicable across industries. And then can we pull people in that just have really great experience? And I'll give a couple of examples. The best technical writer I've ever met is an electrician who, they, came up and ended up doing QA, QC, and like just the way that he understands the pieces and then can communicate them. And that's a skill that is going to help, his career already take off. No one in my HR organization, went to school for HR. Our head of development is, her degree is in occupational therapy, but all of these people, like, so none of them have a technical degree. It's not construction management, it's not real estate, it's not anything like that. But they all have talent and skill and, great people skills. They're curious and they want to learn, and they've, obviously built up tremendous experience coming up from where they started in the data center industry to where they are now.
How optimistic are you that the right people are actually having conversations around this, and like who needs to really own that on an industry level to make sure that we're investing in those development areas?
Yeah, no, I think the conversations are happening. I hear it more and more. It's, there's usually at least a panel or two at every conference I've been to in the last 12 months. And this is something that is really at the company level, not just hire the people that, that may not have the industry experience, but to hire the people in the roles that are going to be managing those folks and hiring those people for their ability to train and develop. And that piece is a shift. And sometimes that's the piece that gets missed. You may hire someone at the director or VP level who's actually really, really good at what they do, and they're not good at training and development. And that's not going to help you, create those skilled folks at the lower levels that then need to move up. So it kind of is adding an extra skill to what you're looking for. Industry-wide, the things that we can do, there has been a ton of action and that's supporting training and apprenticeship programs for skilled trades, developing and supporting data center technician courses at community colleges. We're working closely in Virginia with the Caroline Technology Education Council, I think is what it's called. And looking at, okay, what can we do to go in and talk at high school career days about, what opportunities there are in the industry. Can we go into the community colleges and do, work with them to set up training programs or to create scholarships, both at the trade school level, at the college and university level for people that want to, study engineering or study, plumbing and mechanical, trade. Like those are things that we can support both at the company level and at the industry level. And I think, that is something that I'm definitely seeing happen across the industry is getting broad coalition type support for these types of programs.
I know you're passionate about hiring underrepresented groups and bringing those people into the industry. I suppose that feeds into what we've just been talking about in an industry where we need to look outside of the industry in order to do that. And it's not just about hiring those people. It's providing a clear pathway to advance them once they're in. So what do you think needs to change from that point of view in order to make that happen?
I hate to have to say something has to change because in my mind, that should just be like, that should just be table stakes. Like you either hire the best people or the most suited. And if, you have someone that has skills but not experience, then you create something to give them the experience and apply those skills. So, maybe it is just a little bit of a mindset shift. And, then it will start happening. But, we're certainly conscious of every hire and, we've made hires where it's like, okay, this job is the next step up for you, but we're going to, we've got people that are here to support you in succeeding in that role. And I think having that type of approach across the company leadership is super important. Like we're all bought into that idea.
CleanArc is built around load following renewable energy, rather than simply purchasing carbon credits, for example. So for anyone who's listening who isn't familiar with the difference, could you maybe just high level explain what that actually means in practice and why that matters?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. It's something that we're really innovating on. So when you hear, Google or AWS or Microsoft announce that they've signed a PPA for, a gigawatt of solar, that sounds like a lot, right? But if you break it down a little bit, solar typically gathers its energy during the daytime hours, right? Which is somewhere from, 6 to 12, depending on where you're at in the world. And we know data centers operate 24/7 by 365. So when they're buying that 1,000 megawatts, really they're probably only covering about a third of what their data center actually requires, or what their energy needs are for that, that period of time. So, every PPA that gets signed is great from the sense that it's putting a lot of renewables online to offset usage that's already happening somewhere, but it's not covering that usage at all of the time that it's actually happening. So load following energy is really electron for electron, hour for hour. The electrons are actually being generated and used during the time periods that they're being drawn and used by the servers in the facility. Can you get to 100% load following? Yeah, but it is, that is a complicated, expensive, AES and I believe it was Google did this as a pilot project several years ago. They wrote a white paper about it. It's a big combination of solar and batteries and different pieces to put together. And they're like, okay, we did it. That can be a really complicated process if you're not familiar with how to analyze the cost profile and the pros and cons of using different types of energy and like which one has the best benefit, which one is the most available on your grid. And that's what our energy team has put together with true additionality. So it's true additionality because we are every contract that's signed that's pulling energy from that program is putting new megawatts of renewables onto a grid somewhere. It's not buying from something existing and trading RECs. It's actually putting new energy on the grid, and it's structured in a way that gets to the highest percentage that the customer feels is a good price for them to pay for that level of coverage hour for hour. It's a really cool product. I do not pretend to understand all the math that goes into it, but it really is a huge effort to put together, and I think it's a real value add for customers that actually do want that load following product.
I'm glad you fed that additional complexity into how that shapes what you need from the team. You referenced the energy team there. So what skills become critical when your energy strategy is this deeply integrated into how you develop and operate?
I mean, our first hire was someone who has, advanced degrees in math. Our chief energy officer did origination and energy structuring and energy trading for decades across, different platforms and several stops at, within the renewable space at IPPs, selling energy, doing those PPA transactions with the hyperscalers. So he saw it. Jim saw it from what customers were going to be looking for when he first started working with hyperscale customers in his days at Vantage and Digital and Coresight. You have to be able to explain what it is and what the value is. You have to. The people on that team will actually have to have some experience, as we continue to build it out and hire it, like that origination experience from the renewables side or from the hyperscale side, buying or selling it, is really going to be, I think, critical to putting it fully into commercial execution.
Yeah, I think that just the fact that you have someone with the title Chief Energy Officer shows how much focus there is on that. There's not that many developers who have an energy professional in the C-suite, although it is starting to shift.
It is starting to shift. Yeah, I mean, the number of postings that I've seen for people in that energy branch and the people that I've seen hired into other developers, coming out of the renewable space, which, I know globally, renewable integration is definitely still on the rise. In the U.S., it's in a little bit of a gray area right now, with the legislation that was passed when the new administration came in, but there's still a ton of activity in this space. Like it's not going away, and you're seeing different things kind of pick up that also support some of the off-grid stuff that's happening with the bigger campuses. Battery energy storage systems are really necessary. If you're running off natural gas, you need a BESS. If you're running, if you're putting together a portfolio of projects to go 24/7 load following, you need a BESS. If you are the utility managing the fluctuations of a big ML center going all the way up and then ramping back down and up and down, you need a BESS to manage those fluctuations there. So, batteries are definitely one of the faster growing segments of the renewables energy conversation.
And you've already touched on the fact that community is, explicitly part of how CleanArc builds. And you gave something that you're doing in Caroline County as an example. What does genuine community investment actually look like in practice?
It's a great question, because that has come up, as one of the biggest challenges to getting a project, through the finish line and into development. Now, it has to start with genuine engagement. I mean, genuine engagement, boots on the ground engagement with the people in the communities, not just the people, at the AHJ level who are going to be making the approvals, but really going in and understanding, okay, what's the character of this area? Where would be the best spot we could put this that's obviously going to meet our needs for development, but that isn't going to create negative impacts for the community as a whole. I think that's one of the things that's really starting to come up with some of the latest pushback. I've seen stuff going in next to residential areas, which that's a really tough sell. I've seen developers that may not have a huge amount of experience say, "Oh, this is great power land." Well, it's swampy or it's farmland, and those are things that if you're trying to develop those things, and those things are important to the community to maintain, you're not going to have a very successful process with that community. But maybe there's an area where they're like, yes, we do want some industrial development over here. And you need to sit down and be like, okay, can we make this work with this community? A couple of the things that we've done in Caroline County that I think have built some levels of trust that we're really trying to make an effort here. One, we located our site somewhere where there'd already been some development, and it's right next to an interstate. So it's not, it's not like we're going into some pristine, open field and covering it up. Part of the site is heavily wooded, and we're going to leave it that way. It doesn't make a lot of sense for us to try and convert all of that, and leaving it helped us get our approvals across the line. We met some members of the community that were very supportive of the project, outside of the government officials, and we've built relationships with them, and they've actually been, sort of ambassadors for us in the community as we've gone through the early stages of construction. Now we've got more people on site, but we didn't originally. And so having those folks that are, advocates for us right there that are community members, not people coming in from outside, like that's been helpful. We had a town hall before we got site plan approval. So it was, it was a risk. Like, we're going to go in there and show everybody, here's our project, here's what we're building. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? And we listened. We didn't go in there and say, this is our project, it's going to be so great for you. Like, we listened to what their concerns were. We had an actual dialogue about, what was accurate in some of their concerns and where we could educate them on things like, water use or how transmission upgrades were paid for. And I think we've, created definitely there's still people in the community that don't want that development there. But overall, we've moved forward with, with intention and with the intention of building trust and being a positive impact. Whether it's donating backpacks to the school or sponsoring a golf tournament, or, like I said, participating in sort of the education and development efforts for the county workforce so that, we can draw workforce from the county when the site's operational. Like that's something we absolutely want to do. So but it does require, planning and effort and investment.
Final question from me today is, and maybe it's something we've already talked about, but what's the conversation the industry needs to be having right now that isn't getting enough airtime, in your opinion?
We've operated as an industry very much behind the scenes for decades. Nobody knew that data centers existed. Nobody knew that data centers were behind our first ability to do online banking or send text messages or, have photos on your phone. Then everything went to this mega scale. This is all AI. And so now there's all this pushback against data centers. Everything runs through a data center. This podcast is running through several data centers, probably. I think the level of education that we've missed by keeping the industry kind of very behind the scenes and below the radar is hurting us right now. And, we need to, as an industry, be a little bit more upfront about the things that we support that are not related to big AI facilities. And I think that will kind of help some of the community conversation as well.
Fantastic. Well, look, really appreciate your time. Always
My pleasure.
great to see you.
Yeah, same.
And have a great day.
Thanks, you too.